just just a quick reminder, we're talking about adult learning today, some of those principles, which by the way came out very well even in our troubleshooting. Just a reminder, this was like in session 1 that we started with our coach training. We coach for learning, that's the purpose. We don't coach for therapy and we don't coach for fun, we coach for learning. And we try to do it based around the idea that somebody leading a church, leading a ministry, serving Jesus effectively, has a heart on fire for Jesus, has a head that has theological and practical knowledge of best practices, able to accomplish the Great Commission effectively today, and practical skills to make those things happen, heart, head, and hands. We focus on coaching because it's all about learning. It's not just about having a companion. So we have learning goals. And just for grins and giggles, I'm going to ask as we talk about some of our learning goals, it's important to recognize that different people have different ways of learning. So giving a book to somebody might be their favorite way of learning, but it might absolutely hit a brick wall for somebody that has a different style of learning. So this is basic stuff, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there's 3 ways to look at learning: auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. 3 styles, rather, that people tend to gravitate toward and the way they learn best. All of us learn in all of these best. But for grins and giggles, let's see. Katie, could you read the quote from Alan Alda? And Michael, could you read the quote from Dennis Waitley? And my favorite one, I'm reserving for Luke. I'm not leaving you out, James. We're getting there. From Confucius. Just one by one, go ahead and read that out for us.
Listening is being able to be changed by the other person. Alan Alda, auditory.
When you visualize, then you materialize. Dennis Waitley, visual.
I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. Confucius, kinesthetic.
Yeah, I love all that. Now, most of us, when we talk about learning, we just give somebody a book and say, hey, learn this. But learning, as you know, is so much more full-orbed, full-bodied. So here's the basic ways in which we learn. If you have somebody that is an auditory learner, maybe this is you, I think I'm going to ask, how do you see yourself at the end of this little conversation? People that are auditory learners learn by saying things and hearing things. So a really effective way to learn if you're an auditory learner, for example, is, could you summarize for me what you read in the book? When they begin to say it out loud, when they begin to hear what they've been saying or thinking, it begins to cement that learning. Dialogue enhances learning for an auditory learner. You can give somebody a book, a list of 10 best things to be the best preacher on the planet, and it won't make any difference at all until I have a conversation about it. What did you mean by exegesis? Well, let's talk about it. Let's dialogue about this. What do you mean by you need to be able to touch the heart? What did you mean by that? Let's talk about that. So as we begin to think about these various ways of learning, auditory allows us also to use some tools. For example, books. Michael, you might have in Dawn somebody that might benefit from an audiobook rather than a written book, for example. Being able to listen to it is important. And so Jesus, as you know, was somebody able to teach auditory learners. Who do you say that I am? Let's have a dialogue about it. Almost everything Jesus did engaged in dialogue and people being able to hear and talk and repeat back the things that he said. If you're a visual learner, though, talking about it isn't sufficient. Reading it isn't sufficient. You need to see a visual depiction of it. So drawing an image, for example, of what it looks like to have somebody who's been touched by Jesus might actually be more effective than reading a book about how do you touch the heart. Being able to sculpt or create an image, for example, of how you felt after a board meeting might be more effective than simply dialoguing about it. Many people that are engaged in visual learning like to chart or diagram things out. So, for example, I'm willing to bet, Katie, that your husband, Chris, might be one of those, because when I ever walk into one of his offices, he's got like charts and diagrams and stuff all over the place. Now, that's super helpful if you're a visual learner and you want to communicate with people that are visual learners. Hearing the path, talking about the path isn't as effective as seeing the path, even if it's in boxes on a chart. And being able to see things, for example, not YouTube, TED Talks are a fantastic way for a visual learner to both hear it, to see it, and to see it modeled. So being able to see things even on video might be a good tool you can use for a visual learner. But Jesus was the ultimate teacher, and so he knew that many of his people weren't going to remember things just because he said it. So I love communion. It's like the most full color, 3D model of how to view the salvation we have through Jesus of all time. Jesus took the cup, he gave thanks, he broke the bread, he said, "This is my body." He used those visual elements, and we do it now 2,000 years later with the same meaning and deep meaning that Jesus intended, because he knew that some of us were visual learners. Actually, communion is one of the best examples of full-bodied teaching. Jesus taught during it, he showed during it, and he had people act during it. To take communion, you have to be able to walk forward and physically grab something and taste it and have all of your senses engaged. Communion was an amazing teaching tool. So use communion as often as possible. It's a John Wesley thing because it engages all of these adult learning or all age learning principles. If you're a kinesthetic learner though, reading it isn't going to do it, talking about it isn't going to do it, and even drawing charts isn't going to be the most effective way you learn to do it. It's by actually doing it. So when you actually engage in activity, when you actually put something into practice, or more effectively, if you're a mentor of somebody who's a kinesthetic learner, when you're doing something with your coachee, then they engage it more effectively. They learn it more effectively. So Jesus, for example, when he had the opportunity to feed the thousands, I remember the first thing he said to his disciples was, "Hey guys, you do it. You be the kinesthetic learners. You engage this activity." So looks like we lost Michael. That's a bummer. Maybe he chatted something, but as you think about these learning styles, I think it might be fun to note, and I'm just going to share the screen, that there's a fun little quiz you can take and maybe even have your coachees take. I enjoy it. I will send a link to you. I'm just not quite sure where I put the way to get this link to you in the chat, but educationalplanner.org student self-assessment learning styles, SHTML, has a fantastic 20-question learning style quiz that might be extremely helpful for you and for your coachee. So as we think about these different styles of learning, let me just ask you, what do you think is your primary way of learning? How do you remember things? How are you more able to then put into practice a new insight or a new skill? And I'm going to go James, Katie, Luke.
I'm definitely auditory. I tried to do online school for seminary. Tried to do an online program. Couldn't do it. Failed. Wasted $5,000. It was a mess. So I was like, I gotta go to school. I need to be in class, talking, dialoguing, making jokes, interacting. So yeah, definitely auditory.
Gotcha. So just reading the books, just having information, just seeing diagrams, that's not that. It's about the dialogue, the interaction.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can remember anything anyone says, but when I read a book, I fall asleep.
Okay, remember this. Jesus loves you, bro.
Thanks.
Just saying.
I appreciate that.
Okay, Katie, what's your learning style, do you think?
I think there's a mix of kinesthetic and visual, because I think I usually need a diagram. I usually need a picture to finish out. I think I know what you mean, but I'm not 100% sure. But then also, whenever it's a tactile skill, of course, I have to start the muscle memory before I can even. I have 1,000 questions if I don't try and do it. So.
Gotcha. So visual and kinesthetic. would be your primary ways. You have to fully engage and you have to see it. Just, I mean, not, yeah, you have to see it. Just hearing somebody talk about it in one ear and out the other. Like, gotcha. Well, that's not true. All of us learn in all these ways. We have 5 senses. We use them thoroughly, 100%. So Luke, how about you?
I think I'm primary auditory. I also tend to fall asleep when reading things, no matter how much I want to read them. I can make it work, you know, but it's not going to sink in until I talk about it and I process everything verbally and externally. If I'm not talking, I might not be thinking. So learned that about myself.
There you go. It's good to know that about yourself. So as an adult, and that's what we're talking about is adult learning. As an adult, we have the choice about the things that we engage when we know we have a goal to achieve and we want to learn a new thing in order to achieve it. So if you know just reading a book isn't going to do it. Say, for example, if you're a kinesthetic learner, I'm a kinesthetic learner. If I do stuff, I'll remember it. If I go with somebody who's doing stuff, I'll learn it. I read tons of books. So, I mean, that's a thing, but that doesn't mean that it sticks with me well enough to be able to accomplish anything important with it. So I look at reading books as like the Grand Canyon. It took 1,000 years for one drop at a time to create the Grand Canyon. And I'm sure the Grand Canyon doesn't remember any one of those single drops. And I figure all the information that I allow to soak into my heart and mind, kind of wearing away at stuff, even if I don't remember the individual drops very well. So if I want to explore, though, I got to go and do it, or I just won't. I won't remember it. Luke.
As an auditory learner, I found that if I have to process something by reading it visually, if I'm really struggling and I'm going over it and not observing anything, I read it out loud to myself, and then suddenly it's verbal. I'll just be sitting there just reciting a whole page out loud, and then it works.
Yeah, you just totally nailed the auditory learner par excellence. Being able to see something that you read doesn't become real for you until you say it and you hear it out loud, or until you hear somebody else say it. All right, well, see, we're everybody on this call, we all have different styles of learning, right? So that's going to be totally true for your coachee too. And if you can find out kind of, you know, where they mostly lean, then that would be super helpful, even if it's not in your area of comfort. So for example, if you have a visual learner and you're an auditory learner, then it might be really helpful to be able to say something like, well, why don't you chart out or diagram the 5 main theological principles that you see in the Old Testament, rather than write a 5-page paper that outlines this. So when you do something like that, you give somebody a visual opportunity to start to think about, okay, how do I organize this? How do I see this visually? I do my best as often as possible to summarize things with infograms, because when you're able to have a few key pictures, I don't usually think that way, but I know that a lot of people aren't going to see the words and have any attachment to it unless they see it started out, for example. So think about that. Or if you have somebody that's a kinesthetic learner and you're a visual learner, you might want them to chart it out. And that would be super helpful because we all learn, but probably more helpful might be then, for example, to say, well, instead of reading about evangelism, why don't you find somebody that you know can talk to people about Jesus and go with them? Now, we're firing on all pistons when we're using all these forms of learning, because they're all necessary. It's head, heart, hands, not just head, not just heart, not just hands, etc. But lean into how your coachee is going to absorb and grow more so than what your comfort level in terms of how you learn is. When you can do that, you become a more effective coach. Any questions or thoughts before we move on to our next topic here? It's like, yay, I learned that when I was in 12th grade, so move on. Okay, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this next piece because the day is already getting away from us. But when it comes to adult learning, there are some real impediments. So for example, why not go to seminary? Because it takes time, it costs money, and I have to feed my family right now. It's a little bit now, if you're a young adult and you're in a transitional phase, you can choose to go to school. If you are already an adult who has a career, you're already supporting 2 or 3 children, for example, then this is what we're talking about for adult learning. And most of our CMCs are in this category. So for them, time, money, being able to focus on one thing at a time. James, you brought up, for example, Miranda saying, like, I want to focus on some chunks. These things, you can't have that focus, you can't learn. And the other aspect of adult learning that are impediments is that many adults doubt, one, that it's of any benefit to them. It's all about the benefit. Why would you go through a long-term coaching process if in the end, there's absolutely no real purpose behind it? The other piece of doubt that comes in terms of an impediment is, and we heard Michael talk about Dawn, who he's coaching, really kind of nail it pretty well. I'm not sure I can learn this. And part of that is because of the other 2 things that were on that list. And this will be posted, you can download it later. But one is contradiction. And that is, we're really comfortable knowing what we know. And we're really uncomfortable if we think that what we know is going to be challenged. So a lot of us literally don't engage in learning for the same reason we don't go to the dentist, because we think it might hurt. Something's going to change. Now, I know in the long run it's all better, but I don't want to go through that pain of reorienting my world. Why would I do that when I'm honestly successful now, which everybody thinks they are, whether they are or not? And then the other aspect there in terms of an impediment is neuroplasticity. So that's a fun word that you don't usually use in a normal conversation. But neuroplasticity is a simple idea that you have actual neurons firing in your brain. And as you do certain things over a period of time, you begin to lay down a neural network per se that allows you to do those things more regularly without a whole lot of conscious thought or awareness. It becomes virtually habitual. Thought patterns, philosophies, worldviews can become ingrained. And that, to change that, requires neuroplasticity, the ability to change kind of that neural wiring, to begin new habits through consistent effort. And that's just doggone hard. And the older you get and the more you know and the more habits you have, the harder it is to learn something new. So the fact that the older we are when we start the learning process, is an impediment is that it's just more difficult. It's more difficult to learn new things because we already have these patterns laid down. And popping out of it is literally neurologically and biologically very difficult. So as you think about some of those impediments to learning, do you see any of your coachees kind of faced with that? Maybe you yourself, as you are a learning, growing adult. How are you seeing some of those impediments facing you, preventing you from going as deep as you know you'd like to go in even more aspects of knowledge learning? Would anybody like to share? Raise your hand and feel free. James had just a fraction of a second faster than Luke, man.
I think sometimes when I'm talking with people, even my primary coachee, there's an idea that like she has expressed like, I don't know as much about the Bible as you, and said in such a way that like I never will. And so I wonder if that maybe is a neuroplasticity issue. And then the thing I keep running up
fear of being challenged or not looking good, right?
Yeah, or just saying like that's not my strength. I'm going to focus on something else, which was coming up to this other point. Is like I probably have 2 or 3, maybe 4 people that are interested in ministry, but have said to me like, I don't want to preach. And so I don't know what that is, if that's contradiction or if that's neuroplasticity of like, again, like I know what I'm good at and I know what I think, what scares me. Maybe it's contradiction there. And so I'm willing to enter into this process, but I don't want to do some of this other stuff, you know? So that's it.
Yeah, that's really good. And a lot of people would love to fix their cars, but not get their hands dirty, right? It's just one of those weird things. The good news is, and as you coach through that, let me just ask, what are some ways that you can help coach through somebody's doubt or insecurity to help them continue to take the next step, which, by the way, never goes from I'm terrified of talking in public to addressing a crowd of 3,000 and multiplying loaves of fish. It just doesn't happen overnight. So go ahead. James, you brought it on. So what are some coaching strategies you think you can apply to help people lower that anxiety?
I think baby steps, like doing small groups or talking in front of a youth group or something like that, is always helpful. And then finding a way for them to be able to digest biblical content, that I think just familiarizing them with the topics and ideas and themes through their reading or through their devotional life or whatever. And so I think probably baby steps, reminding them that, like you said, they don't have to have it all now. They don't have to come fully formed as Harvard theological graduates or whatever. So yeah. And recognizing that different people have different strengths. And so affirming what is good about their vocational call.
Man, very good. That's excellent. Luke, I saw your hand up.
Yeah. Am I now answering the question in James' thing or bringing up my own thing?
Your own, bro, but you can build on James.
Okay. For James' thing, I
people
find that breaking people out of that pattern and getting over that doubt, encouragement in small things goes a long way, of course. I think, depending on the person, theological background of spiritual giftedness is helpful too. Of being able to pair, like real life, you did this, I'm going to encourage you. This is wonderful. I see God working in you with what we believe. We don't believe that God gifted 1% of Christians to do ministry. We believe God gifted all Christians to do ministry. And so you have gifts and you can use them, and God desires for you to use them. There is no, well, I'm not able to do this. It's like, well, God made you to do some form of ministry or many forms. Let's go out there and figure it out by trying it. So I find that helps some people. My own thing, I see probably if Aaron has a major impediment, it's time. And that's difficult. That's difficult to work around. If probably my biggest impediment is neuroplasticity, is not just is thinking, how can we do church in ways that doesn't look like the church that I'm used to church looking like in order to bring church to people who don't like church. How can we do things differently than I've ever seen them done or done them myself? That's a big challenge for me. First to think through, and then to actuate and take steps and make it happen. I struggle there.
Yeah, good. It's good to be aware that we all have these impediments, by the way. And our coaching process that we put together is actually designed to address really all of those impediments. So you don't have to be done at any particular time, but you do have to set goals and set deadlines so that at whatever time you agree upon, it gets done. Cost could cost virtually nothing, really, except time and energy. The idea that you have doubts, that's why we coach, because everybody, when they look at a giant mountain and they think they have to cross it and they have no clue how, will just turn around. But when you have a guide, you're a guide. Each of you are guides. When you have a guide, you can say, well, this is how we start. Put one foot in front of the other. Let's walk in this direction. Here's some things that we know as you climb up the mountain that'll be helpful, and you work together with it. This is why Jesus did disciple making, not classroom information dumping. He shared incredible information in community, walking with his disciples, showing them what to do, giving them huge challenges. Go out in front of me and cast out demons. Us? Yeah, you. Yes, huge. And yet, that's how Jesus operated. So when we're talking about theological and leadership formation with you as coaches, It's the Jesus model. It's having an apprentice model that almost, it doesn't eliminate, but it certainly helps lower some of those barriers that people think they have to being able to enter into deeper levels of leadership in ministry. So thank you for jumping in on that. Mike, good to see you back, man. Saw you step away and step back in. We are going to, go ahead. Going to say something, bro?
Oh, I was just going to say technical difficulties, but just so I'm kind of on the same page, the neuroplasticity, that's the changing of the brain's pathways and adapting and learning new things, right?
Yes, exactly right. So we're going to right now jump into adult learning theory. And this is actually helpful to know. This is like the only theory piece that we'll have during our coach training stuff. But it's helpful to be aware of some things as you engage all of your adults in your church, because this is true whether they're a coachee for ministry or not. So just to toss this back up on the screen, there are at least 7 significant theories of adult learning, how and why adults learn, as opposed to children, for example. Pedagogy, teaching children essentially, or the way children learn, is how most of us have thought about education. Andragogy, or really adult education, adult learning, is relatively new, actually, in terms of putting some thought behind how do you engage an adult to go deeper and learn new things. And there are tons of theories, but probably at least the contemporary godfather of this is Malcolm Knowles out of Harvard. And he gives us some really good insights we're going to jump in on some of the key things that make it effective for an adult to learn. And then more recently, Jack Mezirow out of Columbia, I believe, gives us the idea of transformative adult education. And those are the two theories that I think are actually the most effective. And so given the fact that we have limited time and space, we're just going to kind of jump down those 2 rabbit holes. So just real quickly, first question for everybody: when do you seek out new learning? You as a human being, when do you seek out new learning? What would drive you to do it? Anybody?
When I realize I have a limitation and I want to be on the other side of it.
Okay, good. You see a limit, you want to be on the other side. Why do you want to be on the other side?
Depends on the limitation. Because I want to be more effective in some task or process, and I want to see a certain outcome in production, or because something about me and my process or character is hindering me or others, and I want to not have to deal with those consequences.
Super good. So just for an example then, for you, it might be, how do you envision new church, right? You mentioned that. How do you do church in a new way? So Luke, I want you to get really excited about going to my next seminar on how the church operated in the 17th century, because I think that would be super helpful for you in learning how to do new things. How excited are you about that?
I didn't hear everything you said.
Don't worry, you wouldn't be excited about it.
But I heard you say 17th century, so that doesn't sound like innovation.
Exactly right. And so that's the whole point regarding adult learning. We can offer to all of the people who call our church home, by the way, things that really excite me. I love 17th century theology. Well, not so much, but it's a thing, right? So it might be really exciting for me. And so I'm all jazzed about this. Or, why should we show proper respect to Israel? I'm totally in on that, man. I want everybody to learn about this. But that's not where the people in your church are at. And the thing that really drives adult learning is, I have a need and I need to address it now. I'm essentially a functioning human being, or I wouldn't be an adult. I would have died before now. So I have some skills, I can do some things, but I'm not going to waste my time or energy jumping into something that has no real benefit for me or my family or my career. It's just that simple. You can offer as much as you want that you're excited about, but if it doesn't mean anything for the adult that's about to engage that, then they aren't going to learn. They might sit through your stuff because they like you, but they aren't going to learn what they're motivated to learn. So here are the basic concepts of adult learning, things that are important to realize when you're engaging your adult coachee and or anybody in your church that is a grown-up and wants to go deeper in something. First, every adult needs to know, number one, why? Why would I bother going to your particular class or engaging in this coaching? Why? And this can be why on a number of things. Most of this comes out of the internal motivation factor. That is, what's in it for me, or what's the bigger purpose? Now, adults are not as small-minded as, just literally what's in it for me for a selfish reason. What is the bigger picture? What is the big scheme of things that I play a role in? And how can what you have to offer help me grow deeper and bigger in this big picture? Christianity is a big picture thing, and almost every aspect of what we want to teach, train, and lead people into as we engage in the faith, we hope and pray has some internal motivation. It answers a big picture why, but then you also have to have that little picture why. Okay, it's really great that God loves everybody. I need to learn how to love my wife better because our marriage is on the rocks. And my point of pain, what I'm motivated for right now is to have a better life in my family, for example. So you need to know the why. There needs to be that internal motivation, which is both big picture and coming out of an internal need. But adults also know they can't waste their time. So there needs to be very specific and timely, indiscrete chunks that adults learn in. Because again, most adults are employed working, or by the way, employed working in the home, taking care of children, which is a full-time job. It is incredible what we really expect out of people in our churches sometimes, and we look at them as being unmotivated or not fully committed. But by golly, they're just so busy. If they can do one thing in your church, that's a huge step for them. So being specific and timely, which is why in our coaching strategy, we have, you should be anyway, setting clear goals with clear and specific time and knowing that when you're done with doing this, there is something you've accomplished. Check the box isn't just check the box. It's moving deeper into your call for God and effectiveness. So those are the three top tier things. You need to know why, there needs to be an internal motivation, and you need to have a discrete chunk of time in which the learning will take place. But then on more of a fundamental level, understand that every adult needs to be respected, that they have prior knowledge. There's something they've learned that they can build upon. And so it's super important when adults are learning to be able to be heard in what they've learned, to know that they all probably are more expert in their area than you will ever be in their area if that's what they've been living and doing for so long. So allowing adults to build on their prior knowledge is motivating and just plain smart. Also, adults tend to be and must be more self-directed. In fact, that's the fundamental to adult learning, is that they are the ones that have made the choice. Nobody is forcing an adult to learn more. They're self-directed. And their learning must be aligned with their reality. In our case, our learning is aligned in our reality when we are focused on helping somebody who wants to become a pastor to grow deeper in the ability to do that. That's their reality. That's their call. That's what they told you. And that's what we're offering. If you were offering a course in auto mechanics, I might be super interested, but it's not aligned with what they're coming to you to learn. So as you think about some of these basic principles of adult learning, which one speaks to you the most as what you need to recognize as you engage your coachee? I'll pop those up again for you real quick, just so you can see. Why? Internal motivation, specific and timely need. Build on prior knowledge, be more self-directed, and learning aligned with their reality. Katie, how about you? What are, as you look at adult learning and some of those principles, what are you finding to be the most relevant to how you are making disciples and or coaching?
I'm having trouble picking one because I've got 3 people that I'm specifically coaching and various generations to them. And so it's all, not because of generation, but context, everything. I think it's just different. I feel like the beginning stage is always the why. Well, in my 3, I think there's I keep bumping up or tripping. I'm finding a tripping point on the building on prior knowledge. I think people sometimes feel like I have to throw everything I already have or already know out the window, and I have to like completely learn or engage this in a whole new way, which I don't think is always, I mean, you just affirmed it's not always true, but I think it's a tripping point because people don't want to do that.
Exactly.
So I don't know. I think that I see all of them as being really, really present in our learning, and it's just different seasons and different points of context there. So
Yeah, good. And with different people, different aspects of it will always be more important.
Yeah.
Michael, is there anything that you'd like to speak into that?
Well, there's 2 with Dawn specifically, in relation to the coaching I'm doing with her, is the time specific. I'm having trouble with sticking to those commitments because I'm busy and she's busy. So, seems like the time specific is a little more flexible than it should be. Maybe I could make better use of the time before Kaleidoscope, maybe to connect with her or whatever. So, and then the other one is her prior knowledge. So as I already alluded to, she doesn't have formal education, but she's a manager of a store, of a grocery store. So she has all kinds of knowledge, probably a lot more leadership knowledge than I have. It just is more practical and less theory, I guess, than what I would have. So,
Right.
Building on that for her.
Yeah, that's good. By the way, that is why we do an assessment of local ministerial candidates when they become a CMC. So for example, somebody like Don might not need to do some of the leadership and management stuff, but she might need to have some deeper awareness on, basic theology. So there's that. Whereas we have a lot of people in our network who are pretty well read theologically, but have never led another human being, really. So they need to really focus on that. We all have different strengths. And that is exactly right. To motivate an adult learner, never denigrate their strengths. Always find a way to help them see how those strengths are intimately related with everything else they're doing and how they need to lead. That's motivating. But being able to see their point of weakness as well is motivating. That's actually what moves somebody to go to the next level. Luke, anything that you'd like to speak into this? And we're nearing the end of our corner here.
Probably the one that I struggle with most as a coach, figuring out how to work with a specific and timely need.
Yeah, so that seems to be, no, it's specific and timely need. That means,
the person has a specific and timely need, and am I meeting that in a way that's conducive to this person still feeling that their investment of time and money and focus is worth it? Is making the difference they need it to make, because the person isn't going to invest in something they don't think will be effective.
Right, exactly right. Now here is a struggle for all of us, and all of us are in ministry, so we've all, or any field, it's the same with any field. You have a specific need, for example, when you're faced with a task that you don't have any training in, so you need to get that training. But if you aren't doing stuff, like if you aren't, leading small groups, for example, why do I need to learn to do small group leadership? Well, eventually you will. It's like a mechanic who needs to know how to work on brake systems, how to work on pistons, how to work on, I don't know, I'm not a mechanic, so I'm kind of flopping around in the water here. But So you need to work on brakes. And if that's all you do, if you're going to work at Jiffy Lube and just work on changing oil and working on brakes, maybe that's all you need to know. But if you're going to be a mechanic who addresses all kinds of different car issues, even if most of the time you're going to be focused on brakes, you need to know how to fix a gasket seal when it breaks in your engine too. So that's part of the training for a mechanic. You need to learn everything about the engine, everything about the suspension system, et cetera. And eventually you're going to use it. Our challenge is to continue to help keep our coachee focused on learning the things you know eventually they're going to need to know. Even if at this particular junction, they don't need to know it or they don't see they need to know it. But that's why every single one of our assignments has a practical application. Even if you're reading theology, you might be assigned then to teach it to someone else. It's built in, each assignment is built into it, something that they need to do with what they're learning. And that, I hope, addresses some of the urgency. It's kind of a built-in urgency. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I'm clearly not addressing adult learning because, you know, we're all starting to glaze over. Now, we're supposed to be over at noon, but we had a couple of tech glitches coming in, so we'll probably go to about 12:15, but if you have to log off, I get it. Just a reminder, as we looked at last month, the 3 I's and the big E, everything we do has a basic rhythm: inform, that is provide information, implement, the practical application, and insight, reflection on what that was like for your coachee. What can they do better? What didn't work? What did work? What are they doing great at? And then always, always, always encourage. Now that's super important when we're engaging any of these adult learning principles, but we've talked about that. Let me ask, when do you kind of, oh no. I may have lost people. You may or may not be able to hear me. My computer says that Zoom, and I am going to try to log out. Everybody stay in, and I'm going to try to be back in a minute. And if you aren't hearing me, and this is are we back?
I think so.
Tech issues. Yeah, I hate tech issues, and yet we need tech, do we not? Okay, what I want to do is share one little thing about another kind of theory of adult learning, and that is transformational adult learning. One of the core aspects of adult learning that has really come to the forefront kind of since the 70s is that adults need transformation. Yay, go figure, right? And so the theory is transformational learning. And it came to us from a guy named Jack Mesereau out of Columbia University. But when I look at what he talks about as necessary for adult learning, you're going to recognize this as essentially what Jesus talked about as what's necessary for all of us. That is, every adult needs constant transformation, and you only really learn deep things that make a difference when you learn to think very differently about yourself and you learn to think very differently about the world. My conversion was transformational. It gave me a whole new doorway into thinking very differently about myself. And since that time, there have been a number of dilemmas in my life that have disoriented me. And consequently, I've had to rethink some fundamental things that I've thought, about theology, about God, about the Bible, about Jesus, since becoming a Christian. Furthermore, I've had to critically analyze my assumptions or have people help me do that. And theological education is a significant, powerful, and positive way to do that. But ultimately, we're constantly growing and changing. So when it comes to the study of major organizations, one of my favorite books is Good to Great by Jim Collins, excuse me. Raise your hand if you've read that. It's on the assignment for your coachees, almost certainly in the leadership section coming up. But he talked about leaders that were able to make some of the most transformational shifts in an organization over time. How do you turn an organization from being relatively average, good, to being phenomenal, a world changer, something that makes a huge difference, good to great. And there's a whole bunch of principles. If you took the leadership core class, you got those. It's on your reading stuff coming up, you'll get those. But one of the things that I found really striking about his research of major corporations is that most of the leaders that went from good to great did so only after their life crumbled. Only after everything that they thought they knew got pulled out from under them. For some of them, it was something as literally serious as a heart attack. I mean, close to death. And for almost all of them, the transformation afterwards was spiritual. Many of them became evangelical Christians, something you don't read about in business management books very often. But some of the good to great leaders are people that faced death, faced the dissolution of serious relationships, faced a complete undoing, and came out of that with a new world view. And for most of them, it was to become a Christ follower. And that made all the difference. So let me ask this question. Each of you are Christ followers. You've gone through something like that, or you wouldn't be a Christian today. Maybe not facing a heart attack, but you've come undone, right? As Isaiah said in the temple, you've been undone. You've been face to face with the Holy of Holies and realize you are not. And you absolutely radically need something different. So I'm going to assume that each of us have been through something like that. But let me ask, have you changed your mind about something you firmly believed when you first became a Christian, and now you think something different? You're still a Christian, still aligned with what you believe to be biblical and godly, because in fact, you've learned something new. You've gone deeper. You believe something more full color than simple black and white. You've gone from lesser things to greater things. You've stopped drinking milk, now you're eating meat. All the metaphors that the Bible uses. Can any of you share one thing that's different for you now than it was when you were first convinced that Jesus is Lord? Luke.
Sure. When I was first convinced that Jesus is Lord in the way that I was making that decision responsibly for myself, I was still a teenager. So my thinking's developed a lot since then. And I think that plays a part. But some of the major differences are my faith now is considerably more ecumenical than it was before. I believe in eternal and unshakable truth without looking at people in quite as starkly a black and white way as I used to. You know, I see the Christianity in different Christian traditions that I couldn't see before. Before it was, my thoughts were just either you fully agree with everything I believe, or you're obviously not a Christian and you don't know Jesus.
There you go. So
that's one way.
Your view of the platform upon which Christians stand has grown considerably. The platform is a lot wider. God's grace is a lot bigger than what perhaps you first saw. Katie, I know you've gone through some real transformations in terms of prayer and spirituality. What's a way in which your idea of spiritual formation has changed over the past, say, 2 to 5 years?
I would echo, I was thinking along the same terms that Luke just shared, but in terms of formation, I came to faith as a kid, and same thing, so much as, and even when you were talking earlier, I was thinking sometimes there's so many things in the hopper that it's like, I think that I'm totally, I loved that you said that it's more full color instead of gray. Because sometimes it just feels like, man, I need to sit down and really think about where I'm at with some of these things. But I see the need for continued formation, whereas I think that, a bunch of us maybe were taught to a degree that we are formed and then we just follow Jesus and we are who we are. So, maybe that's one way, just a continual need for formation, for dying and pruning and regrowth.
Yeah, that's good. That's a really good metaphor because Jesus uses it all the time. That is really good. How about you? Michael, anything that you'd like to share in terms of a change now from, maybe even 10 years ago?
Well, I don't either. So much seminary. I mean, you talk about a disorienting event, right? I went to seminary at Liberty, and that was a disorienting event, not because it's just that I discovered so much of what I was learning I just disagreed with. Just as an example, we had to take a personal evangelism class, which is the second personal evangelism class that I've taken, one at the baccalaureate level and one at seminary level. And I don't, this personal call for someone to make a personal conversion experience for the Lord, I view that all as a matter of relationship, that we build relationship. It's very missional. That has changed drastically. There's other things, I can go on and on. Another one is the inerrancy of the Bible. I don't believe in the inerrancy of the Bible per se. I mean, especially in the way that it's presented, like the Chicago Statement of Theology,
Right.
I think that was more problematic for people and for myself than it needs to be. And so anyway, I guess that's it.
Yeah. And there's a lot more. And okay, raise your hand if you think there's a good chance that you might change your mind about yet more things over the next 10 years. Yeah. So when we think about this sort of, I know everything, I'm going to teach somebody to know as much as I know. Now discard that. You're journeying with people. They're growing just like you. And in fact, one of the quotes we read is from Alan Alda. He's just an actor. He's not some deep theologian, but it was pretty good. Listening means that I'm opening myself up to change. There's a possibility that as I listen to somebody, I might learn something, about myself. I might have a fundamental worldview shifted and challenged. Racial prejudice is a significant thing that it can only be challenged through interaction with people different from you and ways of thinking that are different. So as you think about adult learning, it isn't really fundamentally about acquiring information. It's about entering into constant transformation. And part of your job as by the way, a pastor, a spiritual leader, and a disciple maker is to invite people into disorienting realities. Jesus did it all the time. Invite people into disorienting realities where they're uncomfortable with their own thought process and their own actions. That's how you end up repenting, when you realize what I'm doing now is really not that good. I thought it was great 5 minutes ago, but you just shined the light on my life, Jesus, and now I got to change. So, that we are not, leadership training and coaching, disciple making is not mostly about making people feel comfortable with where they are. It's about inviting people into areas where they aren't yet, and to realize in that discomfort, they can yet grow through it, and you can grow with it. So in terms of models of adult learning, think a whole lot more in your coaching about inviting people to go into areas where they're not comfortable, to be exposed to thoughts they hadn't been exposed to before, and to do that for yourself. And you will help them to be transformed. Not into your image, but to have enough thoughts, enough disorientation, they stop relying on you, and they stop relying on their own sense of self, and end up relying more entirely upon God and God's leadership and direction in their life. So, adult learning. Any feedback or questions that you'd like to have before we call this happy session to a close?
Can you recommend, maybe when you put up the stuff on the NUB, you could list some resources that you recommend for the adult learning and the transformative theory?
Oh, sure. Yeah, about that in specific, I don't have any up there. I'll definitely do that. There's some really good books that are useful if that's your kind of thing. And of course, I would imagine, I haven't done it, but I've never failed to be pleasantly surprised. If you do a Google and a TED Talk about that, you'll probably find somebody a lot smarter that will tell you in 10 minutes what it would take a book, 10 days to read through. So, well, yeah, that's a really good idea. I'll post some of that up. Thank you. This will also be posted, of course, on the coaching website before the week is over. Good. Well, above all, remember, we're all adult learners. So when you engage your coaching as an opportunity for you to learn and grow, I love hearing, I can't remember who said, I'm reading the book or I'm shadowing the book along with the person. Frankly, that's my favorite thing about coaching, because I love to learn, I guess. But it always forces me to stay fresh and aware. And when I enter into somebody else's life, I always learn something from them, always. Well, our next meeting is coming up in May. So it's May 11 at 11 a.m. Yay. Yeah, same Zoom link. And we're going to be talking about cross-gender and cross-cultural coaching. What are some things to be aware of and how to make that a more effective and pleasant experience for everyone. Sound good? Yay. Okay, Katie, could you close us in prayer, please?
Sure. Right. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thanks for breath in our lungs, and thanks for the invitation to walk alongside you deeper and better. Holy Spirit, we just ask that you would cement these things into our hearts and our minds, Lord, that we would steward them well. Lord, as you lead us and guide us, I pray that you would bless our conversations, God, that you would that you would have your way in all of them. God, we pray for our coachees and Lord, each of the circumstances that they're facing and dealing with and moving through. We ask for an acute awareness to speak blessing and encouragement, Lord, and also to bring challenge in a way that builds up and edifies you as Lord and Savior. We love you, Lord. Thanks for the privilege of being coached and for your grace to welcome us in. We love you. We give this day to you and the rest of our days. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen and amen. Thank you. Go in peace and resurrection power. See you soon.